Hey guys, my name is Naguura, and today I'm going to talk about some things that I would like to see changed in the future of World of Warcraft. Basically, Scribe from Echo made a list on how to fix WoW, and I read that list on stream, and I figured why not make my own list, right? So I was sitting down with Twitch chat and we were talking about some ideas. I said some of my ideas and they said, no, that's wrong. It's completely, like how it usually goes. But then we just did some ideas that they had, some ideas that I had, and we just made this list, and I figured it's a cool thing to share it with you guys. Now, disclaimer, obviously this list is not something that I think is gonna happen. This is more like, like you're sitting down, you're drinking a lot of copium, and you're just like pretending how things could be in like a dreamland. I know none of this stuff is actually gonna really happen, but just talking about it I thought was fun, and I thought it was also interesting to see opinions of people that are not me, right? So to see what people think about the ideas that I am having, see if they agree with it or disagree. So yeah, that's the purpose of this list. Definitely comment below if you completely disagree with a point that I'm making. Keep in mind, that's totally fine. If you don't agree with a point, that's totally okay. Again, this should just be for fun, so don't take it too seriously. I'm also not trying to change the game or whatever. If you like the game the way it is, that's also fine, right? First of all, we were thinking about some sort of global changes that we could make. I'm gonna go through the list a bit quickly because the video shouldn't be incredibly long. So some of my thoughts might be a bit more detailed, but that's something that I can talk about like a later video if you guys are interested, or I can talk about it on my stream. But yeah, let's just go through this decently quickly. So first of all, global stuff, let's talk about account-wide things. I wish account-wide items would be a thing from repeatable content. So what I mean by that is that if you're doing something that you can do unlimited amount of times that rewards you with items, for example, Mythic Blast, then I think those items should be tradable to any other characters on your account. That would allow you to play and plus on your main account, but still trade those items to your alts. Of course, this shouldn't be a thing if it's like a locked item, right? If like raid loot, for example, shouldn't be able to be tradable to your alts. Of course, because those kind of items are limited. So whenever something is unlimited, then you should be able to trade it, in my opinion, to alts, just to make alt life a bit better and easier. Then I also think there should be account-wide unlocks for anything that isn't player skill related. So quests, campaigns, grinds, reputation, all that kind of stuff. I understand why some things cannot be account-wide because of just because you're really good at your hunter doesn't mean that you're also really good on your prod warrior, right? So if something is related to like an actual, like where you had to play your character to be able to achieve it, then I think it's okay if it's not account-wide unlocked. Otherwise, it should be, because anything that's campaign related, quest related, like you've done it once already. It's not that you wouldn't be able to do this again on like another character, right? Like that's, I do think that no player power related daily, weekly content without catch-up systems should be in the game. By that I mean vault, legendary currency, Stygian embers, research, and so on. I don't think those kind of things should be in the game if you can't catch up to it, right? So let's say you missed 1 week of legendary currency, then you should be able to catch up to it next week. I don't think it should force you to do the content on a specific time or day, because that just creates a horrible environment, almost as if it's like work instead of actual fun, right? Like you should not be forced to do it that specific time. Then if there's grindable content that gives player power, then it should have a clear, achievable goal. I don't think grindable content should be this infinite thing that they introduced into World of Warcraft in latest expansions. For example, legendary currency. There's so many legendaries for a class that being able to craft all legendaries is like unachievable. It would take you like literal years to be able to get all of the legendary currency to be able to craft all legendaries on like the highest tier. And I think that's a bit like, it's the illusion of a goal, but it's not actually achievable. You will never be able to farm that many soul cinders to craft all of the highest tier legendaries. So I think that's a little bit of a problem, right? I think a goal like this, or something that is grindable like this, should have an achievable goal that you can, that you can actually reach. I think you should be able to unlock flying in each zone after finishing the zone campaign there, because that just makes sense, once you've done the campaign, you have done all, like you've been to all of the parts of the region, of the zone. So I think you've seen everything, right? Or most of the things. So I think it's okay that you can fly afterwards. Then I also think you should be able to unlock flying for previous expansion zones as soon as you hit max level in the current expansion. It makes no sense, in my opinion, that you cannot fly in previous expansions right now, just because you haven't unlocked it with the achievement. Like, I just don't think it makes sense. If you are max level in the current expansion, you should be able to fly in all previous expansion zones. Then I think we should be able to remove PTR. I think having no PTR would really, really increase the experience for everyone involved. Of course, for raiding, it would be a better experience because you don't know bosses mechanics and so on. But that is something that a lot of people constantly talk about. What I want to focus on about the PTR is also the experience that, you know, everyone else would have. Because the way it works right now is we have so many really dedicated people who go onto the PTR to figure out everything before it comes out, to write guides and whatnot. And it's great that they put so much time and effort into those guides. But for a normal player, it just feels like a patch comes out. Think about 9.1, for example. Patch comes out, you download the patch, and before you even log on, you already like Google things like, okay, so what did 9.1 bring? And then before, like when you reach Corthia and you see something that you don't know about, then you just Google it. It's like, what is research? What is this? What is that? And you just constantly Google guides and look into those guides instead of figuring things out yourself, how it's supposed to be in an MMO, right? I think if you wouldn't have all of these guides because there's no PTR and everyone would figure everything out at the same time, it would enforce like the MMO feeling a bit more, the social aspect of the MMO, which is something that we are missing nowadays, right? That is something that we had in the past that people loved so much about MMOs. If you log on, there was no PTR and you have no idea how Corthia works, you have no idea how research works, well then what would you do as a player? You would probably, hang out in like a voice chat with your guildmates or with your friends and be like, okay guys, so did you figure out how this thing works? It's like, yeah, you have to do this. And then it's like, like it just creates a better environment, I feel like, where you go through the new patches content and you figure things out as you go without being able to like look up guides immediately as it releases. I know guides would exist even without PTR pretty soon, but at least not before it goes live, right? So yeah, I know that guides will always be a thing, but at least they would not be there as soon as the patch hits. So you would be able to have some of this experience without Googling the guides. And then some people are saying, well, just don't look up the guides, just experience by yourself. But we all know that that's not how it works. People don't like falling behind. So if everyone else is looking up the guides from PTRs and you are not, then you clearly are falling behind compared to your friends or whatever. And no one likes to be that person or likes to be behind that much. So yeah. Now let's talk about tokens. I think we should just remove tokens. If anything, it creates just a bad environment from the player base versus Blizzard, right? It just feels like it like really ruins the trust from the players to Blizzard. Players just feel like Blizzard is doing anything they can to increase token sales. So all of the decisions that Blizzard is making, it's like, it's because of tokens, right? So even if that is not the case, even if removing tokens maybe would not even help with anything, which I doubt, but even if it wouldn't, it's still better to remove them for now, just to regain trust from the player base, which is Blizzard is really lacking at the moment. And I would also say, though, that there should still be a way of paying your subscription with gold, because that's the only good thing about the WoW tokens, is that some players who would not be able to afford the subscription otherwise, they can pay it with gold. So I do think that should still be enabled, just no like Blizzard currency or whatever with the tokens. So I do think that the price of the token could be generated according to the server your character is on. Let's say you are on Terran Mill and the currency is worth, the gold is worth that much at the moment on that server, so the token is costs that and that much gold, right? So depending on the server, it just automatically creates the cost of the subscription that you would be paying with gold. Then let's talk about RMT. I think RMT should be more like monitored, because there's still a lot of RMT happening, and I think Blizzard should definitely just look into it more somehow. I know it might not be as easy as I say it, but this is supposed to be a document or like ideas where, you know, anything is possible. So yeah, fix RMT. Then I think Blizzard should be more transparent about changes, explain what the problem is and why it's being fixed that way and what their solution is and why they're doing this, right? I think a lot of trust is gone between the player base and Blizzard. So whenever Blizzard makes a change, people always jump to like the worst intentions immediately. It's like, oh, they're just doing this because of that and X and Y, right? So if they would explain some of the reasoning behind it, then maybe some of the players would understand it more. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So just be more transparent, be more honest, explain what you're doing. Then I think somehow Blizzard needs to work on regaining more trust with the community. For example, they could do some really bold changes that the community is asking for. And they should also talk to the community more, as I talked about earlier, explain motives, be honest, even if it's negative. People might be able to forgive things if you're being honest about it. I know that it's not always true, but sometimes an MMO has so many different player bases, right? Some people are, you know, more into that. Some people more into this, PvP and plus, raiding, pet battles, story, lore, whatever it may be. So sometimes Blizzard needs to make a change that is really good for one part of the player base, but maybe affects another part of the player base slightly negatively. If Blizzard would just be a bit honest about this and say, hey guys, we have to do this, because it really positively affects that part of the game. And we know it might affect this part of the game a bit negatively, but we're gonna monitor it and see what the effects are. And then you can always say something like, oh my, if it actually is really bad for this other part of the game, then we can reverse it, right? I don't think reversing a change is something that you should completely shy away from. Otherwise, we're going to end up having a game where there's just bad changes piled onto bad changes because the company's afraid of reversing something because of the bad feedback they're going to get from the community. Then I think cross-faction gameplay should be allowed. I think there are some people who still care about factions. So to make up for that, I think there could theoretically be a little bit of a downside for doing cross-faction gameplay to make sure it's not happening all the time. For example, that's a good idea someone had in my Twitch chat. You could disable racial abilities if you're mixing Alliance and Horde, right? So I think racial abilities have such a small impact on your damage and whatever. It's like such a small thing. A lot of people would not care about it, but people who really want to min-max, they are still probably going to go full Horde or full Alliance or whatever. But I would definitely say that it would, you know, open it up a lot more. Now, of course, we could just remove any sort of negative side effects and just allow people to do cross-faction gameplay. We should be able to play off-specs easily without restrictions or punishments. I don't think that playing off-specs should be hard at all. There have been expansions where it was easier to level a second of the same class if you wanted to play a different spec. And that should never be the thing, right? Like, you should never feel the need to level up a second druid or a second warrior just to play another spec, because it's so difficult to get the same player power on another spec. Like, for example, with legendaries in Legion and artifact power in Legion, that was a big problem, right? And I think and same with conduit energy, right? Conduit energy, I don't think that should even exist at all. I think you should just be free to play whatever spec you want. And I think it should even be enforced and should be made easier to have this class fantasy of being able to play whatever spec you want instead of feeling forced to play other characters. Then I had an idea of maybe making Bloodlust a bit more interesting. I got this idea from Final Fantasy XIV with the limit break. I thought it's really cool. Depending on who uses the limit break, it does different things. So I was thinking that we also have something like we have Bloodlust in World of Warcraft, right? Which is this global buff that you're free to use whenever. But it kind of became a little bit of a boring thing nowadays because Bloodlust almost always is being used at the start of the pool, and it's kind of not as exciting as it maybe could be. So maybe changing Bloodlust to be a bit more interesting in some sort of way. Maybe you could decide which stat you're getting depending on what food buff you have or something like that. Maybe you could do something different depending on what role you play. Maybe someone can pop Bloodlust, and then if you're a healer, you get something else compared to what the damage dealers are getting. I don't know, something more interesting with it, I feel like, because it definitely has lost some interest with recent expansions, I feel like, and it's just kind of there, it just exists. So maybe there could be something that we can change about it. Then let's talk about rating. In rating, I think a big change, in my opinion, would be doing something special for like the high-end raters, because I think we have a pretty big problem in the rating community, because the high-end raters, like the people who really want to go for the difficult content, want to be challenged, want to have a difficult time clearing the bosses, they're being mixed in with the crowd that doesn't necessarily want to wipe hundreds of times on a boss. They just want to kill the bosses, get the loot, and move on, kind of deal, right? And I think those crowds are mixed in with each other, and that creates some issues. I really like the approach of Final Fantasy XIV, where they have something called ultimates, where the ultimates basically are designed for only that high-end crowd, that there's no items to drop there, only transmogs basically, and titles, and the item level also gets scaled when you enter that ultimate. And I think that's something that we could maybe do in WoW as well. I personally would combine normal mode and heroic together. So we have one like normal heroic difficulty, then the mythic difficulty, and then an extra like harder difficulty that is specifically made for high-end rating, where your item level scales when you enter. And I think people that wouldn't want that challenge, they wouldn't even attempt to go there. Of course, there's transmogs and titles, but that's something that people wouldn't attempt to do just just for the title, just for the transmog, right? They would probably do it because they enjoy it, because they have fun. So Blizzard can really go all out on the difficulty there, and for the other difficulties, they can go a bit easier. And I think they should possibly also make the normal, heroic, and mythic difficulties into a lower rate size. I know there's going to be some problems with lower rate sizes. I'm going to talk about this later, but I do think raiding is just so much more accessible if you have less people in a raid. It could be like a 10-man raid or 15-man raid, whatever it is, just a bit lower to make it more accessible. There will be so many more guilds that want to even attempt raiding, because having a 20-man roster is just so much, and guilds are falling apart left and right because they don't have enough people. And also the social aspect within a 20-man raid is a lot worse compared to like a smaller raid group, because with 20 people, some people don't speak at all within like a whole raid day or raid evening rather. Lowering the raid size for these like for normal, heroic, and mythic difficulties, in my opinion, would really make the raiding scene a lot healthier again. And having this extra difficulty for the more hardcore players would make everyone kind of happy, I feel like. The 20-man aspect, the big raid size, has something that people really like. I totally understand that. It's kind of what makes World of Warcraft raiding, because WoW has always been a game where there were 40-man raids, 25-man, 20-man, and that's like a big thing in WoW. So they could maybe make the really difficult raiding aspect, like this ultimate raiding that is made for only those players, they could maybe make that still 20-man. So the people who are into those like 20-man raids like we have them now, or had them for a long time, that they still have that content for them, right? I know there's going to be issues. If Mythic is 10-man and this ultimate is 20-man, then that might create some problems with, like normal guilds that want to do Mythic and ultimate. But you could just, like maybe create 2 raiding groups for Mythic, and then you have one for the ultimate, basically. Not sure how to go about these raid sizes, because it's hard to keep the 20-man raids alive and then also enforce like a lower raid size. I don't know, but I think it would be great to just have this a little bit more of a separation between super like hardcore players and people who just want to raid a little, right? I don't think mixing them in makes so much sense. Then I think I would love to have a global release of the raid. I think everyone kind of wants this, and I don't think it would have too many downsides at all, except with the weekly reset that should be addressed, or that could be addressed for a couple of weeks, and then afterwards it could go back to a normal weekly reset. Then possibly make old content relevant again by turning it into 10-man content and scale people back, but also tune it to be a proper challenge. So we do have time walking, but I think time walking is bad for multiple reasons. Number one, it doesn't actually recreate the situation as it was previously, right? You don't really get the same abilities that you had before. And then also, because the raid sizes were so big in the past, because you had 25-man raiding, 40-man raiding, whatnot, you kind of need to create the time walking content as like an LFR content. And of course, LFR content is not going to be a challenge, right? If you just queue up for something and you go with random people that you don't know into like old content, of course that content cannot be too difficult. Otherwise, no one would want to do it. So how do you make it so people want to queue up with friends instead of queuing up with like in the LFG tool? I think by making it smaller content. If you, let's say you bring back something like Black Temple or like Hellfire Citadel, but instead of making it the same raid size as it was back then, you tune it for like a 10-man content. Of course, some abilities might not work the exact same way as they did before. You could change some abilities around to be adjusted to 10-man raids, but at least it would be somewhat of a similar experience because it's still like a challenge, right? Because if you design it around 10-man, you could still tune it pretty difficult. So people who queue up for it, they have at least a little bit of a challenge. They don't just run through and it's like LFR and none of the abilities do anything at all, right? And I think if it's 10-man, a lot more people would also be willing to attempt it. A lot of people would find some friends and be like, hey, guys, you want to do Black Temple today or whatever? And just go back, have some fun. Of course, it shouldn't be like the most difficult content ever, but it still should be like a decent challenge. And I think it would be great. I know this also would be a lot of work for them to do this. So again, I'm inhaling the copium here, but I think it would be a really cool thing if there would be old 10-man content that you could just queue up for. Then, this is something that I care about a lot. Don't directly nerf bosses. I think they should be nerfed with optional buffs to players, so we have the option to play the original version of the fight. And by optional buffs to players, I mean just items, for example. Items are optional buffs, right, that you can scale down or remove, but also other buffs, right? I think everything that nerfs a boss should be able to be removed if you choose to do so. Because right now the way it works is that we have the bosses that are really tuned super hard in the first week, and then they get nerfed pretty quickly afterwards. And not just passive nerfs through more item level and more like renown or whatever, they also actively get nerfed through hotfixes. And I don't mean like bugs, because of course if there's a bug then it needs to be fixed, but I mean like actual number nerfs and actual difficulty nerfs of a boss. I think that's just something that creates such an unhealthy environment where if you're not a well-versed raider, like if you're not raiding 24/7 the first couple of weeks, then you will never be able to experience that boss again how it was the first week. And I think that is really sad. I think we should be able to experience the boss in like its difficult state again if we choose to do so. If we want to make it hard on ourselves, we should be able to do that, because some people are just playing for fun. Some people don't care about necessarily their world ranking, but rather the fact that they killed that boss in its difficult state. So being able to at least have the option to do that, I think should be there. Then let's talk about Plus quickly. Mythic Plus keys should be able to be used in any dungeon. So if you loot a key, it should be a 15 key and not a 15 Mists of Tyrna Scythe key. So that key can be used in any dungeon you want. Then change the way dungeons get released. I personally think that this old system that we release 8 dungeons at the start of the expansion and then barely release any dungeons anymore for the rest of the expansion is like a really outdated system that was good when dungeons were the stepping stone to raiding. Because before M+ existed, the expansion came out, you did some dungeons, and then the raids came out, and then you did raids, and then you barely ever did dungeons again. It was this like in-between content before raids. But now we have M+, and that's not true anymore. So I think that the whole system needs to be changed. The way dungeons gets released needs to be changed. An idea that I had is maybe release some of the dungeons on release, like 3 or 4 dungeons on release, and then give us some old dungeons in the seasonal rotation or weekly rotation. So let's say you have 3 or 4 new dungeons, And then the other 4 or 5 dungeons that are available for you in that season with that seasonal affix is Neltharion's Lair from Legion, Freehold from BFA, and so on, right? And then you just fill up the pool to make sure people don't get bored with older dungeons. Then when the next season comes out, when the next raid gets released next season, then you release some more new dungeons, and again, you fill up the pool with some old dungeons. And you do this until you only have new dungeons and no more old dungeons. And I think this would be so good in so many ways because a big problem with dungeons nowadays, in my opinion, is that because they release all of the dungeons at the start of the expansion, first of all, it becomes really boring. And second of all, they also don't have a chance of really addressing issues. Because whenever a new expansion comes out, the meta changes, all of the classes work differently, everything works differently. So dungeons get designed without that in mind, really. If let's say they designed all dungeons already, and then after like a month or 2, they realize, oh, all dungeons kind of favor this or that, then they can't really address it anymore. But if they would actually have the option to release more dungeons over the course of the expansion, they would be able to address those issues more that maybe the first 4 dungeons had. And then they could fix it to balance the M+ meta a bit more, that they need different kinds of things in different dungeons. Obviously, it would also be better for M+ being more interesting if there's more dungeons coming out. Then, in my opinion, you should remove unenjoyable affixes, for example, bolstering or necrotic. In my mind, unenjoyable affixes are affixes that make certain pulls completely impossible or require you to do unfun things to prevent them from happening. For example, tanks not being able to hit the mobs while they're kiting for necrotic, right? Necrotic creates an environment where the only way to play around it is by the tank literally just going out of melee range, not playing his character anymore. And I think that's definitely not a good way of avoiding an affix. And the other thing is bolstering, that literally makes some pulls impossible because you literally can't play around it, right? You cannot pull mobs on top of a boss. Like, it's impossible, right? You can't kill them because the boss gets buffed, and it's just like, yeah, you could kill them, the boss is buffed, and then still kill the boss, and it just takes much longer, but why, right? You could also, of course, pull the mobs and then not kill them, but that's also just creates an environment that is not fun. So I think some of these affixes, if it really requires you to do something that is completely like against World of Warcraft, right? Like if you really shouldn't, like you just don't play your character anymore because you walk away, or you completely cannot outplay the affix, then I think that's bad. Something like Sanguine is a good example of an affix that in my opinion is like a good affix that, yeah, people don't like Sanguine that much, but you can play around Sanguine in like without doing something that is unfun. You can, move the mobs while still attacking them constantly to move out of the Sanguine. You can use your utility to move them out of it, right? Every pull that you can do without Sanguine, you could also do with Sanguine. It just becomes a lot more difficult and a lot more foreshadowing. Of course, there's some pulls you don't want to do with Sanguine because it's too hard, but theoretically it will be possible. Unless there's a mob that is not movable at all, right? Of course, if there's like a tentacle or whatever that can't be moved, then that's a different story. But you know what I'm trying to get to, right?